All right. Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to part two, selection and onboarding. So, thank you for attending, and we're eager to get started. So, just a quick note: this webinar is for providing ideas and resources, but not specific guidance or recommendations to you or your unique business situations. When I have speakers on, and in almost every case, they're more than happy to engage with you and your company individually as part of your advising team, and whatever their individual discipline. So, for example, in human resources consulting. And they can provide you with kind of tailored recommendations based upon your unique situation for you and your leadership team. So let's get moving. We've got about an hour. This webinar is approved for one SHRM and one HRCI credit. I do have the certs in hand, so probably by mid-afternoon at the latest, I'll have those emailed out. Sorry about the snafu with the HRCI cert last time. Hopefully anyone that attended that session was able to get that. There were some issues with the technology and they had like funny dates on them, but it should have worked fine. Again, as I mentioned just before we got started, this is being recorded. So if you can't attend the whole thing, or you miss parts or want to go back, or you want to share it with a colleague, you'll get a link that you can use to watch it at your convenience. It's also almost all of the webinars that I post, or you can find them one on YouTube under you just look up insurancing, or you can go to my LinkedIn page and my profile page, and there's a link there that will take you out to YouTube. So unfortunately, I don't have the chat feature available, but we do have the Q&A feature. So if you have a question, you can ask that. If it's extremely relevant to the point at hand, I'll like raise my hand and get Fern's attention and interrupt. Otherwise, we'll just kind of aggregate those towards the end and go from there. So quick intro on me. I'm Brian Klickener with Risk Strategies. I've been doing insurance for over a decade. I've got some experience in the GovCon sector as well, and way back in the Wayback Machine, some experience in retail, which kind of helped shape the way that I approach clients. We have over 1,800 employees at Risk Strategies and over 70 offices. Basically what we do and what I do specifically with employee benefits is help companies create bespoke employee benefit plans. So as an aside, what's a bespoke employee benefit plan? Instead of just buying off the rack from like a carrier like United or Care First or Anthem, we help create alternative funded solutions, even down to employers that have like 30 employees. I just went through this process with 50 Life GovCon, and the carrier came back with a flat renewal but worse benefits. Our solution that we modeled out and then was proven out through the underwriting process is 15% less with an improvement in benefits. So that's kind of what I do, my little infomercial. So if you'd like to talk, whether you have 25 employees or 100 employees or more, we've got solutions that are probably a little bit different than you're used to seeing. And I'd love to have a chat with you about that with no strings attached other than ability to kind of listen and kind of look at the market a little bit differently. So Fern Ehrenberg. Fern is a human resources executive and entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience in for-profit and nonprofit sectors. She is also the heart of Eagle HR, which she founded in Vienna in 2010. Fern's experience includes senior level positions with the Blue Cross Blue Shield Association, Deloitte Services LP, and the USO. She also holds an undergraduate degree in communications from the University of Delaware, a Master's of Science in HR from Loyola University in Chicago, and is a graduate of the Novadella Society of Human Resources Management Peer Mentoring Program. She is a member of the Society of Human Resources Management and is a certified facilitator in a variety of industry-leading assessment and training programs. With that, I'll pass the mic to Fern.
Thank you, Brian. So good morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here again with you. The weeks have flown by since our first time together. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. We're here for part two in our three-part series. And as Brian said, we'll be monitoring the Q&A throughout, so please feel free to submit any questions. I'll try to get through the slides relatively quickly so that we can answer whatever questions are on your mind. But just as a brief recap, for what we did last time, we started kind of at the beginning of the recruiting and interviewing and onboarding process, where we really talked about creating an overall effective hiring program, how to handle applicants and interviews and all that sort of stuff. And now what we want to move into is kind of what's next after that. So we're really going to be focusing on that bridge between applicant to candidate to employee. and bringing people along in the most effective and engaging way possible. We'll talk about some day one activities that can be used to help new employees feel welcome and engaged right off the bat. But we're also going to talk about onboarding, which is really much more of a lengthy process than just the first day orientation that most people focus. Well, I shouldn't say most people, many people focus most of their efforts on. So we'll talk about the importance of both orientation, which is an event, and onboarding, which is more of a process. And then we'll, talk about some of the tools and resources that are at your disposal to create a really powerful experience for your folks. So that's kind of the focus of the next, we'll say 54 minutes, just to kind of bring up the process flow that we shared last time. In the green is really what we covered before, and the bluish gray underneath is what we'll be focused on today. So let's jump in and talk about selection. And selection is really just that. It's identifying from your pool of candidates who you want to extend an offer to and what a good process is for doing that. So at this point, after you've kind of gone through all the steps of recruiting, we would expect that you'd have a pretty small pool of remaining individuals, right? So maybe you've got 2 to 4 final candidates. And they should be fairly easy to rate or rank if you've kind of followed some of the steps we talked about last time. You've used forms during your interviews to capture thoughts and to evaluate candidates on the criteria that you said was important. Now you can put those forms side by side, call all of your interviewers together, and have a conversation about who really rose to the top out of your group of candidates. So a few notes on the actual process of selecting folks. This is a balance. It's take your time, but not too much time. So by take your time, we mean make sure if people are on vacation who interviewed the candidates, make sure you're not bypassing them to make a quick decision because the work needs to get done, or your people are desperate for support, or you just want to get it off your to-do list. Do make sure that you take appropriate time to consider all relevant input and appropriately vet your candidates. At the same time, as we've talked about last time, especially your hot candidates, so to speak, your ones with unique or special skills or certifications or talents, they're not going to stay on the market long. So you got to have that balance between not having too long and extended a process, but still making sure that you're getting all the relevant input that you need. Make sure that in addition to technical skills, you're also looking for cultural fit. And I want to take a minute to talk about this. Cultural fit is a different thing than personal fit. Okay, so when you say cultural fit, what we really mean is someone who, to the best you can assess during an interview, displays the values and ethics that align with the organization, maybe and the role that's needed. So, maybe the organization has defined specific cultural values that are important, whether it's innovation. That's actually a good one we can talk about. So let's say your company really values innovation and you bring on somebody who just doesn't seem to, they're kind of status quo, do things as, they've got a great background, they seem to have a good skill set, but they don't really seem to be that interested in sparking new ideas or exercising innovation. They may not be a great cultural fit because of that. What we don't mean by cultural fit is, wow, I really like this person and I think we would be great friends outside of work. Like that's a little bit of the kind of like me bias that we sometimes run into. When you sit with a candidate and you really hit it off with them and it feels great, that's wonderful, especially if you're going to be working closely with that person. But just stop and check yourself and make sure that they're going to fit with the culture of the organization as much or more than they would fit with you as a person, because it's really more important that they fit in the role and in the company. Identify unique skills or things that you may not currently have in your workforce or culture, right? So if you are a team of introverts and you usually bring introverts on because they feel more comfortable for you, maybe your team could use someone who has kind of a stronger preference for extroverted behavior. Maybe they add a balance to your team. If you have a lot of people who focus on big picture, maybe consider bringing someone in who likes to focus on details a little bit more. It could create a really great balance for the team. Consider small differences. I still think a thank you note after an interview, call me tremendously old school, that's fine. I don't care. I love getting a thank you note after an interview. An email is great. What really stands out these days are a handwritten note. I mean, I don't know why. It just, to me, it sends such a message of commitment, extra time, willingness to be personal, but just something that sets your candidates apart from each other, whether it is a thank you note, whether somebody was just dressed a little more professionally, that's not going to trump someone who's skilled versus not skilled, or qualified versus not qualified for the role. But when you're comparing pretty similar candidates who are really close to each other in terms of your evaluation of them, seeing who went a little more above and beyond, can be a way to differentiate and make the right decision. And then, again, really look at, when you look at your hiring criteria, really consider what's essential for them to walk in the door with versus what can be trained. Because there's a lot of things out there that wind up in job postings and on job descriptions that can be taught. And if you have somebody who's enthusiastic and engaged and really wants to work hard and learn and grow, that's stuff that can't be taught. And so there are many times I'd much rather have that and then train the technical skills if it's possible. So just some things to think about as you're making those types of decisions. So then let's say you've identified the person you'd like to make an offer to. The next step is likely going to be a conditional job offer. So this is where you're going to extend the offer to the candidate, but you're going to be very clear that the offer is contingent upon their satisfaction of certain things, right? And this is where you can consider as an organization what types of screenings, if any, you want to include. So we see lots of folks doing background checks, whether it's checking educational background, degrees, things like that, criminal background checks, in certain positions, credit history may be very important if you've got someone who's handling finances for your company. Some organizations do drug screenings, driving record checks if they're driving as part of the job. Personal references, fitness for duty tests, psychological or mental health assessments. I would say that to the extent that your company wants to offer any of these, make sure that you check with an employment attorney to make sure, number one, that it's reasonable and permitted based on the types of roles that you're hiring for. And also, there's tons of laws and requirements around these types of things. And so just work with an employment attorney to make sure that your process in terms of the timing of steps and things like that is all, in line as it should be. And a good employment attorney will make sure that you don't misstep. So you do the conditional offer. Now you do your checks. Why even bother with them? Everybody's probably got a story about someone where maybe not the best hiring decision was made, and something could have been found out if we had done a little due diligence before we brought on the candidate. It can help in protecting the company from liability. I had one situation where a client didn't do a background check. It just wasn't part of their process. And the person who came onto the workforce wound up being violent and had a violent history. And had convictions, and that would have come out if they had done a background check, hindsight being 20/20, whatever. But they ultimately wound up implementing background checks after that horrible experience because they just never, ever wanted to find themselves in a situation where they could have known if they had just taken one additional step. So sometimes you need to do background checks for insurance requirements. So again, just talk to your insurance and your legal advisors, find out what's required or what's recommended based on the type of work that you're doing. Certainly if you're in government contracting, there's a whole additional level of background screenings that may need to be done. But process is really important here. So the main thing that I'll say is if you decide this is something you might like to explore, figure out what you want to explore And then make sure that the process you're following is sound and the people who are conducting them are the right people. Normally, your HR department will facilitate the checks. Usually they work with a third-party system or vendor to do that. So like ADP has a screening and selection arm. There's tons of very fine background check companies where you can go. They take care of the assessment for you. And then they send you a report with the results. Now, my final word of caution on this, and it can be an area that's kind of rife with legal landmines, is anytime you are considering making an employment decision based on information that you get through one of these checks, please consult your employment attorney before you take any actions, because there are laws that protect folks from what's called adverse actions based on information that can be found in some of these background checks and reference checks. So again, use it if you think it will be helpful. Work with advisors to make sure you're doing it correctly and that you're doing it safely and fairly for your candidates. And always, if you're going to change your course of action based on anything that you see in them, vet it with an employment attorney first. But it can be a very useful part of the selection process. So I definitely wanted to mention it. Okay, that's pre-employment checks. Let's say they pass with flying colors, you're off, or they don't, but you ultimately decide that's okay based on guidance from your employment attorney. Now you can go ahead and issue the final offer letter, formal documents that we want to include some pretty specific information, because in a land of at-will employment, which is where we are, we generally don't do employment contracts. So this is the place, the offer letter is the place where we kind of share our understanding and agreement on the general terms and conditions of employment. So you want to make sure that you're including what the person's job title is going to be, and maybe a brief description of the role. You can even attach the formal position description. That's always nice to do. You'll want to include the start date, general work schedule, who they're reporting to, compensation information, paid time off and other major benefits. I've seen it done both ways. I'm in favor of a more concise offer letter with references to attachments rather than putting everything in a really long offer letter, but it's totally up to you. I would just recommend that you say, this will be your compensation, you'll be eligible for all of our, benefits that are afforded to full-time employees. Please see attached benefit summary for more information. Like that's, a great way to go. But you put some at least a mention of eligibility for benefits. If you have any non-disclosure, non-solicitation, or confidentiality policies or agreements that you're going to want them to sign as part of their onboarding, you reference them here. And we also want to make sure that your offer letters have protective statements in there. So this is protecting the company from liability and sharing expectations regarding employment is at will. When you come in, you have to be able to provide proof of your ability to work in the United States. That's your I-9 verification, and to do that within 3 days of your start. Put in information about Fair Labor Standards Act, whether they're considered an exempt employee or non-exempt, eligible for overtime. So those kinds of statements we want to make sure are in there. We also want to incorporate a statement that any of the terms and conditions of employment can be modified at any time. It's not an employment contract. So it's just kind of a snapshot of the terms that were agreed upon at the time of hire. And of course, I hope it goes without saying, but this is a great communication vehicle with your new hires. So it doesn't have to be super dry and legalese. These are things we need to make sure we include, but what's around all of this can be really nice, warm, welcoming, like great language about how happy we are to welcome this person to the company and how excited we are to help them grow their career. Like that, it doesn't have to be like read like a legal document. So I definitely want to make sure that that's said. Have them sign it and return it by a certain date. And then also great to include in here is what's next. We look forward to seeing you on the 15th. The week prior to that, you'll receive, onboarding paperwork and benefits information or whatever the case may be. Your manager will be reaching out to you to schedule a time for lunch on your first day or whatever. But just to give the candidate something to kind of keep them going until they actually set foot. Well, not literally set foot these days, but work their first day for you as an employee. So that's the final offers on the start date. And now we're at start time, right? So this is their orientation and onboarding. So I love this little graphic because to me, it really captures what I hope your takeaway is from the orientation and onboarding discussion. Orientation is like this limited event that usually occurs on the person's start date, sometimes like in the first week or whatever, but it's designed to communicate very specific information to prepare the employee for starting with the organization. Onboarding, which every time I say it feels like I'm saying waterboarding, which is torture. We do not want our onboarding to be seen as torture. Onboarding is a lengthy process that can occur, honestly. I've seen onboarding programs that go through the first 18 months of employment. But at minimum, it should go through the first few weeks and months of a new employee's tenure so that you're building engagement. You can start to build engagement with an orientation program. Certainly if you have a less than stellar orientation, people will remember it and it could negatively impact engagement. Conversely, if you have a fantastic orientation program, it could get them off on a really like nice, engaged, excited start. But if you don't do anything after that, that glow can end pretty quickly when you send them to their desk and they start, digging into the work and getting into normal life. You don't want accidental engagement in your organization. You want engagement to be intentional, and you want to work on building it in folks as they get started with the organization. So the goal of a great onboarding program is to build that comfort and acclimation over time. So it's gonna, of course, reinforce everything that you said in orientation, but it extends far beyond that. So for orientation, things you'll probably want to include, and again, thinking about it in terms of this is like the basic stuff that people need to get off on the right foot in an organization. So overview of the organization, its history, its mission, its values, what the culture's like if it's been defined. And a lot of organizations work on their corporate culture now. Share that with your new hire. How the company's structured, reporting relationships, give them a kind of the lay of the land. Work hours and schedules. These days, it may be helpful to talk a little bit about how Zoom or video conferencing is used, how remote schedules are working, if that's in place at your organization. Talk a little bit about life in a COVID world right now and how it's impacting your company. So they know the rules of engagement, right? Like it's really hard to come into an organization anyway when you come into one where you're not getting to interact with people on a daily basis in an office. It's even harder. Codes of conduct and ethics, work policies, common benefits, career development and training opportunities. To the extent you can build in something like a getting to know you game or activity, that's wonderful. We've seen a lot of Zoom happy hours. I've seen a lot of new hire welcome coffees by video conferencing. So everybody grabs a cup of coffee in the morning, you do some sort of an icebreaker or team building exercise, but it just gives the new hire an opportunity to say hi and introduce themselves and let the team introduce themselves. And it's, less than perfect, but better than nothing. And so encourage you to do something like that to try to make folks feel connected. Address technology issues, introductions to peers and managers. Again, we can't really do lunches these days, but happy hours and coffees and whatever, food and drink always brings people together. And then to the extent that they will need to go into a facility or an area, a tour is always a wonderful thing. And that's probably sufficient for an orientation program. One thing I do recommend, to the extent you can bring other folks into the agenda, lovely, right? So a lot of times we have a leader of the organization come in and talk about the history, mission, and values. It lets the person hear from somebody besides you, which is always good. no matter how wonderful you are. It's nice to have, just in terms of attention and all that, a shift in speaker, but it also gets them just exposed to other folks. It's more people they know. It's more people who will say hi to them on the next Zoom call, kind of thing. So anybody who's a subject matter expert, if you've got an IT person who can come talk about your technology stuff, or a payroll person who can come talk about your timesheets, whatever helps to make it more interesting and informative for the person is great. So that's really good for orientation. And I will say, you know, I've seen everything from hour-long, I've seen everything from no orientation, not recommended, to, you know, 2-week-long orientation programs. I do think, like with many things, it's a balance between getting people started with what they need and not overwhelming them with information. If you get them the basics for them to survive and then put some of your other things into onboarding versus orientation, meaning that you're stretching it out over the next several weeks and months rather than trying to have kind of this condensed orientation, it may be more successful. Depends on your environment, depends on what information you're trying to share. But in many situations, if you just cover kind of that list, this list in orientation, you can then take all these wonderful things and stretch them out. So invitations to cross-functional meetings. So this is like, imagine if you walked into a new job and you attended your orientation, and at the end of the orientation, they handed you a packet and they said, we've got a lot of great things planned for you over the next couple months to help you know this organization better and feel more comfortable here. Week 1, we've set up meetings in these different departments so that you can attend and learn more about what they do. We've assigned you a mentor who can help you kind of get familiar, not just with the organization, but help you grow in your career, all that. Maybe you give them a buddy. All these things, you know, pick and choose what makes sense in your organization. But it really sends a great message to your person when they come in and plans have been made for them. When you've identified, you don't have to do all the work. You could even say, you know, here's a list of people who, you know, are really critical to our department functioning well. What I'd like you to do is over the next 2 months, schedule a coffee with everybody on this list. Get to know them, find out how we can better support them. Boom. That's part of their onboarding. They're driving it now. You just pointed them in the right direction. So it doesn't have to be a ton of work for you, but it can really help them feel involved in the organization. On-the-job training and training courses are always wonderful. Tons of online learning available. Anything that increases the employee's sense of engagement and identity with the organization is going to work to this. I would really suggest defining a process. You could even put together a little task force depending on how large your team is. But defining a process for everyone, and then it becomes really easy. It becomes almost muscle memory to execute it as you have new hires come on board. Last word on this that I want to say is the power of gifts. So I know that, you know, money is not always abundant, but it doesn't cost a lot of money to start the engagement, the onboarding process really early. So we talked last time about how the person really first starts getting their impressions of you as an organization when you post your job, right? So that's why the posting was so important, right? Because it's a reflection of you as an organization. Well, so if they're forming their first impressions of you all the way back there, we don't want to start building their sense of engagement after they've already walked in the door. We can do that really from the beginning too. And so there's a really critical period of time between when you send them their offer letter and when they start. There's like this vacuum sometimes of contact with the employer. And it's such a good time for you to reach out to them and kind of keep them warm, keep them excited about joining. They're probably finishing up at their other job. Maybe they're taking a little time off. Wouldn't it be great if one day they just got in the mail from you a hat with your company's logo on it and a little note written by their hiring manager that says, "We are so excited to have you join us on the 17th. You know, thanks so much for picking us," or something like that, right? I remember I once got a bouquet of flowers from a job I was about to start. And I was just blown away. I don't know why, but that gesture really, really made a positive impact on me. So branded stuff is always great. No need, you know, a lot of places have a coffee mug with the logo waiting for the person on their first day when they walk in. That's all great. But I just urge you to look for opportunities when there isn't usually a lot of connection and communication, and beef those up as much as you can.
So Fern, just sorry to interject, but one idea on this, given the context of the environment that we're in, is in like a pre like first day package is a company logo face mask that they can wear into the office if they have to come in for the first time, right? And then
Yeah,
it kind of is that kit, right?
brilliant. Yep. Yeah, there's lots of organizations that are doing the logo face mask and even logo hand sanitizers. I mean, there's lots of stuff along those lines. So if you get creative, talk with other folks, see what they're doing. Those are great ideas.
Yeah, and I think it shows that you're also considering the employees' health and welfare, right? So it sends multiple messages at one time to them.
Yeah, I think, and Brian, I am going to actually piggyback on that because I didn't think about it and include it in the slides, but you're so right. Like, I think to the extent that you're bringing folks into an office or workplace environment, maybe it's a facility or a shop, whatever. If you have guidelines for safety that you've developed for COVID, share those in advance. Let folks know that that's very much on your mind and that you're committed to ensuring that they're safe and healthy at work. That will mean a lot to folks as well and their families too. So thank you for that. Okay, so wow, we went through that pretty quick. So I'm going to just to recap. So for now, we've kind of covered today the selection, the offers, background screenings, all that kind of stuff, final offers and start dates, orientation and onboarding. At this point, I'd love to open it up to questions, either things that you have on your mind about today or the stuff we covered last time is fair game as well. If you want to talk about anything in terms of advertising for jobs or recruiting, that's fair game as well. Or anything HR, I guess.
I'll kind of kick things off. So I've got observations or questions that kind of popped up towards the beginning. Having cultural fit is always an interesting thing. I've worked for not a lot, but enough companies and seen a vast array inside of a particular organization, but specifically focused on your company trying to determine if somebody is a cultural fit. There's a couple of questions that kind of popped up. One was, can cultural fit be augmented or trained? If you identify that somebody is maybe out like at the fringes of what you would say is kind of the way, this is how we do things here, this is the way we are. If they're kind of on the periphery or just outside, is that something that you've seen work well to kind of take a flyer and then to train them, or I don't know if I have a great form question, but like, I think you're nodding that you understand what I'm saying.
I think I do. Yeah. I mean, and I think it's less a matter of training and more a matter of conditioning, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like, so mutual expectations, like shared expectations, are the key here, I think. So I love bringing in people who think a little differently or maybe don't necessarily fully jive with because who's to say that the current culture is the desired one anyway, right?
Right.
But so if you anticipate that there's going to be a clash of some sort, I would simply have a conversation with the candidate about it. And I would say, look, I can tell from our discussions that you're like really a big picture thinker. I do want you to be aware that we kind of have a tendency as an organization to be very data focused and very detail driven. And so I just don't want that to at some point be a frustration for you. So, if we choose to partner up in this employment experience, then, we'll certainly work with you to help you kind of flex that muscle and grow that muscle of being bigger picture thinker. Understand that you may have more success when you work with people by trying to frame things in that way. Right. And in the meantime, we have a lot to learn from you in terms of being, I think I just flipped the example, but you know what I mean? Like, so tell them how the company really operates in that sense, and make sure that they know, so they don't come in and they're like, why are these people so narrow-minded, right? Like, so I think those kinds of conversations are good. And then you can work with the person to develop their ability. But homogeneity is not the goal. So
Right.
I would love that person to learn how to kind of meet folks in the middle so that they're not frustrated and they can be more effective. But I'd also love the rest of the team to learn how to meet that person a little closer to where they are so that they can learn too a different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Kind of building on that. So obviously HR has a significant role in kind of this through this process, but there's ultimately a hiring manager as well that is doing their, for lack of a better way to say it, their technical evaluation of this person. Can this person do job X to a level that that I want, and can I see them helping to further our delivery of whatever the product, solution, service, right? If there's a conflict between, I had this under cultural fit, but this could be in other areas as well. If there aren't like substantial knockouts, right? So if somebody didn't pass a drug test, or they didn't pass the pre-employment screening, right? This is kind of in advance of this before an offer is made, and there's some discussion between HR, recruiting, and the hiring manager, and HR has a pretty strong position that this person is not going to work well, but manager is like, I know this person, I've seen them in other environments, and I want this person because they're the uber technical person, right? They're the savant or whatever. Um, uh, I guess it's kind of twofold. One is how would you consider resolving that in the incident that's occurring, and two, would you use that to, is it better to like take a step back and have a plan for that in advance of running into these kind of log jams? And I guess maybe this is more of a how do you train your hiring managers question, maybe. But so kind of a lot there to unpack. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, no, so let me start trying to unpack it and then just stop me or jump in with additional questions. So I think we had talked a little bit last time about the planning process, and I think some of this ties into the planning process. Like, I think at the outset, it's very important to define roles. And so part of that is who the ultimate decision maker is on hiring. My experience has been it is very rarely, if ever, HR. It's usually the hiring manager, since that's the person there was no bitterness there in that comment, by the way. It was just a comment. But afraid it came off that way. No, I mean, it's the hiring manager is the person who's going to have to manage that person usually and work with them side by side and make sure that they can accomplish what needs to be done in the job. So usually it's the hiring manager who has ultimate decision-making authority, where other interviewers and HR might be advisory to them. And so the first thing is, I think, establish clearly what the roles are, right? So then if we get into this kind of conflict, I can say to the hiring manager, I understand the ultimate decision is yours. I have some concerns I'd like to share, and these are them, these are they, and this is how I think we can kind of counter them if you decide to move forward with an offer. Okay. And maybe I come at it a little more strongly and say, I strongly suggest you do not hire this person, because you just got to be prepared to back it up. And you got to be prepared to back it up in terms of as objective criteria as you can possibly get to. Because what we don't want, and this is where we always have problems talking about fit, is for people to assume that we're making decisions for reasons other than criteria for the job, meaning discriminatory or in any way inappropriate decisions.
Right.
So we always want to be able to tie our objections and our support for candidates to specific criteria of the role. Okay, so here's one I see a lot, right? This role requires significant interpersonal interaction with clients or colleagues. And, this individual didn't make eye contact. They answered in one-word questions, or they answered questions in one-word answers. They never asked us any questions. Like, their interpersonal skills were not at the level that we would anticipate someone who had this level of interaction external parties would be. So that's an observation that's very clearly tied to a criteria for the role. That's a case where I would say, I know you think this person, and maybe they are, is exceptional at their technical skills, but would you really feel comfortable putting them in front of a candidate when they didn't answer anything in more than one-word answers? And we have a conversation about it. But ultimately, you need to know going in who has the ultimate say-so on an offer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did that get to?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it was a pretty overarching, broad question and this idea. One thing that a couple of ideas that popped up just as you were talking through, the handwritten note idea, I think is a good one. I have like an example of that. It's political, but although I won't get political, it was a local candidate here in Virginia that it was really weird. I got a phone call, and I've never had a candidate actually call me before. And he called me on my cell phone and started talking to me, and I was like so like taken aback because I've never had
Yeah.
obviously pre-election. And then a week after that, I got a postcard that the candidate wrote, and it was obvious that it was the candidate. Not that I'm a handwriting expert, but it certainly wasn't. The handwriting was less. It was like my handwriting, which I would say is pretty poor. It's obvious that that candidate wrote out a thank you for taking a few minutes and chatting with me. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't vote for the candidate, but it did stick out in my head that candidate took the time to be personal. Right, the call was one thing, the postcard was a whole nother thing, and neither one was expected. But it made me think, like, wow, this person is really trying, really wants my vote. It was interesting. It was the first time, in 20 plus years of voting that I've ever seen that tactic employed with me.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, and I'll build on that by sharing one other example of something that people might want to do in the workplace. So this idea was triggered by a very similar experience, Brian, to yours. My family had we had donated to it's an animal adoption organization, and they sent it was for my son's Hanukkah present one year. He wanted a donation made. So they mailed us a card that was handwritten to him that said, thank you so much for the donation. Your money went to help, I forget the name of the dog, I probably shouldn't, but it said, your money went to help this dog find a home. Here's a picture of the dog. I mean, they put a picture. Who knows if that was legit and the money really went to help that dog. But my kid saw that and was like blown away. So it happened to be right before I was talking about an onboarding orientation program for a client. And what we decided to do for the employee, because this had inspired us, was we kind of took their workstation that it was a new hire and they were about to start about a week out. And so we got their desk all kind of prettied up and we got all the supplies ready and the laptop was there and all that. And we took a picture of it and we sent it in an email with a note and said, we are so ready for you. This is going to be your new, your new spot. And it's just waiting for you to come in and whatever. And the person loved it. I mean, it was just such a silly little thing to do, but it was you're on our mind and we're thinking of you and we're ready for you kind of note. And so
it's I think that's key. Like kind of dovetailing on the personal touch, I know I haven't experienced this personally, but I've heard of these different tactics with, especially now where we are with, if part of your process in the onboarding phase is, hey, you're going to go out to lunch with Samantha, who is your direct supervisor or is your mentor, your whatever that process is, that can't happen now. However, it's not all that difficult to do like a Grubhub gift card or an Uber Eats, and then that way the employee can get like food delivered to their house, jump on a Zoom with that same person, have a one-to-one, and have that conversation in a structured, environment. Maybe it's just 30 minutes and they can still get that connection. And it's relatively inexpensive, right? You're talking Grubhub type stuff is probably what, $10, $15, something like that.
Yeah, that's perfect. And even if you have an administrative assistant or someone who would have coordinated it for you if you had been in the office, you can still have that person reach out to the new hire and say, we're going to bring lunch to you on your first day. So pick from this menu or whatever, and they can even arrange for the delivery so the employee doesn't have to do anything. So those are great, things to do.
I had one last thing. Not seeing that this question, but please feel free. I'm only asking stuff that popped into my. So if you guys have things, I would be happy to share through. So I'm reading this. I say reading. I guess I do a lot of walking now because I'm remote, and so audiobooks, and I'm listening to this book by this author named Jim Collins. It's called Great by Choice. And there's a segment, and it was when you said the phrase, you don't want accidental engagement, immediately, like, because I've been listening to this book for the past week, it popped into my head. He has this passage, and he actually refers to this particular, like, kind of solution set. It's called a SMAC recipe. So SMAC is big S, big M, small a, big C. And SMAC stands for specific, methodical, and consistent. And he uses this to talk about, these basic recipes that these big time companies, I say big time, that we all know, like Southwest and Microsoft and Intel, they have these types of things, what they call these SMAC recipes, and they use them. And generally speaking, he documented like 30 plus years with these companies and counterparts of these companies that weren't successful, like Southwest, for example, like Pacific Southwest, which was basically Southwest of California, that Southwest like ripped out all of their operating models and used, but Pacific Southwest failed, and Southwest is a household name.
Yeah.
So like like they have like this SMAC recipe, and it's very kind of specific to them, but it's one of the things is they specify that they're only going to fly 2-hour segments. They're only going to use a specific kind of plane, or they're going to have 10-minute turnarounds at every gate. They're never going to take air freight or mail. They're not going to do food service. Now this goes back probably 30 plus years, so things have changed. But these are like principles that they would stick by for like decades, right? And this is like it's like kind of like the how we do things here. It completely made me think of that, like, you don't want accidental engagement. Like, the reason that these guys and gals that run these companies, and these companies are household names, is because it's not an accident. They're planning it, and they're always looking kind of over their shoulder to make sure that they can improve, and they're making kind of sometimes just thinking fast but acting slow, but they're always trying to have a process in place and managing that process. So.
Yeah, no, I could not agree more. I'm going to go get that book, but I really could not agree more. Like I teach a class on kind of HR fundamentals. So it kind of covers like this comprehensive look of the different parts of HR. And it's a core theme that I run through the whole thing, is that everything will be accidental unless it's intentional. And that's, in HR, it happens with everything. You will have a culture. Do you want to have an intentional culture, or do you want to have one that happens by accident? Okay. It's important to make it the one that you want it to be. You're going to have an onboarding process for sure. Do you want it to be one that just kind of happens, and it's going to be different for each person depending on who they work with and, how the mood people are in that day or what we remember to do? Or do you want an intentional onboarding process that gives everybody the same kind of high quality experience as they, become a part of your company? So I just think that intentionality theme is so important with everything that you do in HR. I love it. SMAC. It's good stuff.
Weird acronym, I'll be honest with you when I hear it, but
it sticks.
Pretty cool. So yeah. All right, so I don't see any questions. We're at the, we're going to give back, I guess, maybe about 10 minutes of this hour. So I'm grateful that for everyone that's been able to attend. And Fern, as usual, thanks for your expertise and engagement. I think learned a few things here today that I didn't know, and rounded out some that I kind of thought I knew. So that's good. Hopefully everyone else that's on here was able to learn a bit. I will get the certs out here in a bit, and then I'll get this posted out on as well so that you can see this if you want to watch it later. We have to determine the kind of the next day. That'll probably be in September, but it'll certainly be in the near term fall, so to speak. And everyone that's been in attendance will get an invite to that. So thank you for that. Fern, I'll give you the last word.
Wonderful. I don't have much profound to say except thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining. If you think of questions you had, please don't hesitate to send them to Brian or to me after. We'll be happy to answer them at any point. And I hope you guys join us for the third and final session of the series. Stay safe and stay well and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.